Chapter 14. Allowing without obeying. Most people do not realize how often they treat emotion as instruction. They believe they are simply being honest, simply responding naturally, simply letting the moment guide them. In reality, the mind often confuses the presence of a feeling with a demand to act. Anger appears and the body leans toward confrontation. Anxiety appears and the body leans toward control. Disappointment appears and the body leans toward withdrawal. A subtle irritation appears and language sharpens. These shifts are so familiar they feel inevitable. They are not inevitable. They are rehearsed. The mind learns emotional obedience early because emotion is persuasive. It arrives with sensation, urgency, and narrative at the same time. It does not ask to be taken seriously. It arrives as seriousness. The moment you feel a surge, the mind begins constructing a case for why the surge must matter. It tells you what it means, what it implies, what must be done. Even if the content of the story changes, the underlying claim remains consistent. Because you feel something, you should follow it. Allowing is the refusal to accept that claim. Allowing means letting emotion exist without trying to eliminate it and without trying to convert it into behavior immediately. It is a posture of openness that does not become surrender. It acknowledges the weather without rearranging the day around it. It says internally, "This is here," and it does not add, "Therefore I must." This is where many people get confused. They believe the only alternatives are repression or expression. They imagine that if they do not express what they feel, they are suppressing it, and suppression feels dishonest. They imagine that if they allow a feeling, they are endorsing it, and endorsement feels dangerous. Both assumptions are mistakes. Allowing is neither repression nor endorsement. It is recognition without obedience. A feeling can be acknowledged and still not be granted authority. Authority is what emotions often seek, not because emotions are conscious agents, but because the nervous system behaves as though urgent sensations deserve immediate action. That behavior made sense in environments where the primary threats were physical. In modern life, much of what triggers urgency is symbolic. The nervous system does not always distinguish between actual danger and discomfort that merely resembles danger. It sends the same signals, and those signals can be intense. Intensity, however, is not a reliable guide to what should be done. This is why allowing is not softness. It is discrimination. It is the ability to hold sensation without letting sensation become policy. When emotion is obeyed reflexively, the person becomes predictable to their own triggers. They can be controlled by a tone, by a comment, by a delay, by an unexpected request. Their mood becomes a steering system. This is not freedom. It is compulsion dressed as authenticity. Allowing is the beginning of freedom because it breaks the link between feeling and action. The first barrier to allowing is the mind's urge to resolve emotion immediately. People rarely let a feeling simply exist. They either try to get rid of it or try to act it out. Both are attempts to escape the discomfort of having an unresolved inner state. The mind wants closure because closure feels safety. It believes that if a feeling is unresolved, something is wrong. Often, nothing is wrong. Often, the system is simply processing. Emotion has a natural lifespan when it is not fed. It rises, peaks, and shifts. It can linger, but it tends to change shape if it is not reinforced by story. The reinforcement usually happens through thinking. A person feels a surge and immediately begins replaying what caused it. They imagine what should have been said. They predict how the situation will unfold. They assign motives. They build a narrative. The narrative keeps the emotion alive by continuously re-triggering the same sensations. The person concludes the emotion is powerful because it will not leave, but it will not leave because it is being summoned repeatedly. Allowing interrupts this summoning by refusing to rehearse. Refusing to rehearse is not the same as pretending nothing happened. It is simply recognizing that rerunning the scene is not the same as understanding it. A person can understand something without narrating it for an hour. They can acknowledge anger without building a courtroom in their mind. They can acknowledge anxiety without forecasting catastrophe. They can acknowledge sadness without turning it into an identity claim. Allowing is the choice to let the emotion be present without making it the center of attention. Attention is what makes emotion sticky. A feeling that is noticed and left alone tends to soften. A feeling that is stared at, analyzed, justified, and argued with tends to intensify. The mind often does the latter because it believes it is working through the emotion when it often is simply amplifying it. Working through is a vague phrase. In practice, it often means making the emotion feel resolved, and resolution is not always available on demand. Allowing accepts that reality. It accepts that some internal states will be present while you continue living. It accepts that you may feel tense while still doing careful work. It accepts that you may feel disappointed while still showing up. It accepts that you may feel uncertain while still making decisions. This acceptance is not resignation. It is maturity. It is the recognition that emotional weather does not need to be cleared before action can proceed. The objection that arises here is a familiar one. If you do not obey emotion, won't you become cold, robotic, disconnected? The fear is understandable because many people have only seen two models. They have seen people who express everything immediately, creating turbulence. They have also seen people who suppress, becoming rigid and brittle. Allowing without obeying is a third model. It is not coldness, it is contact. A person can feel fully and still choose carefully. They can acknowledge anger and still speak with restraint. They can acknowledge fear and still move forward. They can acknowledge resentment and still behave with integrity. Integrity is the actual point. When emotion is obeyed reflexively, integrity becomes conditional. A person is kind when they feel kind. They are patient when they feel patient. They are disciplined when they feel motivated. Under pressure, these traits evaporate, and the person later describes it as not being themselves. In reality, that was also themselves. It was themselves without separation. Allowing builds separation without denial, and that separation is what makes integrity possible under changing conditions. This is why allowing is practical. It produces outcomes. It prevents small emotions from becoming large actions that require repair. It prevents temporary states from producing permanent consequences. Many professional and personal disasters begin as ordinary feelings that were given too much authority too quickly. A moment of irritation becomes a harsh remark. A moment of insecurity becomes an unnecessary power move. A moment of anxiety becomes an overpromise. A moment of envy becomes a subtle sabotage. The emotion itself was not the disaster, the obedience was. Allowing creates a pause in which a different response becomes possible. A different response does not mean a nicer response. It means a response chosen rather than discharged. Sometimes the chosen response is firm. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's a boundary. Sometimes it's a direct conversation. The difference is that the response is not an attempt to relieve sensation. It is an attempt to meet reality. Meeting reality requires tolerating sensation. Tolerating is not glamorous, and this is why many people avoid it. The nervous system wants immediate relief. It wants to discharge tension into action or to anesthetize it with distraction. Allowing asks you to stay with the discomfort long enough to see that it is survivable. This is not a heroic endurance. It is simple honesty about what the sensation is. A tight chest is a tight chest. Heat is heat. A rush is a rush. These are physical conditions. They can be unpleasant. They do not necessarily require immediate behavior. The mind tries to convince you they do because it fears helplessness. Allowing proves a different kind of power. the power to not act impulsively. This power becomes visible in how a person handles provocation. Provocation is everywhere in modern work life, though it rarely looks like open hostility. It looks like dismissive tone, ambiguous criticism, being ignored, being questioned, being misunderstood. The nervous system reacts. The mind wants to restore status. It wants to correct the record. It wants to win. If emotion is obeyed, the person becomes a creature of status defense. Their day becomes a series of small battles. Allowing does not mean accepting disrespect. It means not responding in a way that increases disrespect. It means refusing to let the other person's behavior determine your own standards. A calm, chosen response is often more powerful than an immediate one because it is less predictable. It is not easily manipulated. It cannot be pulled into the other person's emotional frame. This is why allowing can feel like strength to others. They sense that you are not hooked. They sense that your behavior is not available for easy provocation. This also changes the relationship to motivation. Many people obey emotion in the form of mood. They work when they feel like it, avoid when they do not, and call this being in touch with themselves. In reality, it is a quiet dependence. The person has outsourced their consistency to their internal climate. Allowing without obeying creates a new pattern. The person can feel resistance and still begin. They can feel boredom and still continue. They can feel fatigue and still do what is necessary with restraint. This does not mean ignoring the body. It means not treating the first sensation as the final verdict. The body speaks in signals. The mind often turns signals into laws. Allowing keeps signals as signals. A signal can inform you without commanding you. Anger can tell you a boundary may be needed. Anxiety can tell you something is uncertain. Sadness can tell you something mattered. None of these signals dictates the correct response. The correct response depends on context, on consequences, on standards, on timing. Allowing gives you access to this wider frame because it keeps the signal from collapsing into action too quickly. This is why allowing does not make a person less emotional. It often makes them more emotionally accurate. When you are not constantly acting out emotion, you can feel it more clearly. You can distinguish irritation from exhaustion, fear from uncertainty, anger from wounded pride. Obedience blurs these distinctions because it moves too fast. It takes the first label and builds an action around it. Allowing slows the chain enough for discrimination to occur. Discrimination, again, is the real skill. It is the ability to perceive internal states without being possessed by them. It is the ability to let emotion pass through the system while maintaining behavior aligned with reality rather than aligned with compulsion. Over time, the mind learns that it does not need to escalate to be acknowledged. The intensity of emotion often decreases not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it with reaction. A steady mind is not achieved by dominating feeling. It is achieved by removing feeling's automatic control of action. Allowing without obeying is the daily training ground for that removal. It is practiced in the smallest moments, letting the tightness exist without sending the email, letting the urge to interrupt exist without interrupting, letting the desire to escape exist without leaving, letting the craving for reassurance exist without chasing it. These moments do not look heroic, they look ordinary. Yet they are the moments where a person stops being governed by weather and begins living like someone who can remain inside the moment without being dragged around by it. In this way, allowing is not passive. It is a quiet assertion of agency. It is the decision to let emotion be present without letting it dictate the day. It is the creation of a relationship with feeling that is honest but not obedient. And once that relationship exists, the mind gains something it has been missing all along, the ability to act from standards rather than from sensation, even when the internal climate is loud.